in the violinist case, then, Thompson is suggesting that there can be situations in which there's a person with a right to life that nevertheless you are morally permitted to kill. And she then goes on to elaborate what she thinks is wrong then with the sort of anti-abortionist arguments in the literature prior to her paper. So she thinks that anti-abortionist theorists suppose falsely that if a person has a right to life, then it's always immoral to kill them. And she claims that it's by no means enough to show that a fetus is a person and to remind us that all persons have a right to life to establish that it's always immoral to kill them or to have an abortion. In fact, she says that the theorist must establish that killing the fetus violates its right to life. That is, that an abortion is an unjust killing. It's a morally impermissible violation of that person's right. And so in the remainder of the paper, she's going to go through each section, considering modifications of the original case, introducing new cases, and they're all designed to illustrate and to reinforce that initial, she hopes, intuition that you had. That, in fact, in the violinist case, it'd be morally permissible for you to disconnect yourself. And that case is strongly analogous to the case of abortion, and so it'd be morally permissible, at least in some circumstances, to disconnect yourself. And so she's going to want to build upon that intuition, develop it, try and make it more systematic, make clear the set of situations that you think clearly constitute permissible cases. And she's also going to want to argue that abortion providers, so doctors who perform the procedure for someone, are also doing something that is morally permissible, even if it results in the death of something that we're stipulating as a person with a right to life. So the first case that she considers, she goes, look, to sort of illustrate this and reinforce this idea, I want to point to other kinds of situations where we think that it is clearly morally permissible to kill someone. And so she points to self-defense. And she says, look, in situations where we're defending ourselves, where killing someone is the only way we have for preserving our own life, right? Then she says self-defense is clearly a case where the right to life doesn't prohibit you from killing someone else, some person. And so she takes that initial violinist case and she modifies it slightly so that it's a case where we have this self-defense component to it. So she says, you imagine you wake up and the violinist is connected to you just as before, and you're told the violinist will die if you disconnect yourself. But now you discover that your continued connection to the violinist is going to result in your own death. That is causing your organs to fail. And so by continuing to be connected to the violinist, you will cause severe harm to yourself, risk your own death, and by disconnecting yourself, you then put an end to that risk, that own possibility of your own death. And she says, surely now your intuition has got to be, yes, it would be morally permissible for me to disconnect that violinist that I never intended to connect to me, even though that violinist's life is dependent upon me. It's also the cause of my imminent doom. So we have this modified violinist case, which she thinks manifests this property of self-defense and also creates this intuition that would be permissible. Then she draws creates another hypothetical case that draws the analogy a little more closely and directly. So she says, you imagine that you wake up and now you're in a room with a baby, and the baby is growing and growing and growing. And this is a confined space. And so as the baby grows, the baby starts to use up all the open space in the room. And you realize that as the baby continues to grow, it will eventually crush you alive. So that by allowing the baby to grow and not killing the baby will eventually grow so big that it kills you, crushes you to death, not intentionally, necessarily, but just as a matter of course. And so she says, surely in this case, you'd be morally permitted, again, not morally praiseworthy, but morally permitted to kill that baby, to prevent that baby from growing so large that it crushes you, that it kills you. And so she says, look, in these cases, the person in this situation is put in a position where it's kill or be killed. The other person is dependent upon them for life, but that very dependence is threatening their own life. And hence it looks morally permissible to allow that person to end that connection, even if it results in the death of this other person. Now, in the second case, she changes things a bit, because in the second case, she talks about self-defense, but she extends the argument to cover the case of an individual who comes to the aid of a person who's trying to defend themselves and is committing, with the aid of this other person, a act of she considers to be morally permissible murder. And so she's trying to imagine, right? She says, look, if self-defense is a legitimate case of killing without violating a person's right to life, then she says, at least in some circumstances, helping someone to defend themselves can't be illegitimate either. So helping someone to defend themselves, even if it results in the death of someone else, that can't be morally impermissible, just without exception. And so she says, by analogy, physicians and healthcare providers that perform abortions in those situations, in cases where they're preventing harm or death of the mother, those seem to be in the exact same sorts of situations as people who would help someone who's killing someone in an act of self-defense. And so she again comes up with another thought-provoking hypothetical situation where we imagine that we're in a position to help someone. This person we know has a coat and it's deathly cold outside. So this person will freeze to death if they don't keep their coat on. But there's another person who's trying to steal their coat, trying to pull their coat away from them. And we know that we're going to have to choose. We could do nothing and let the other person steal the coat and watch this person die because her coat was stolen from her. Or we could intervene and help them to defend themselves. And by doing so, we will help that person to survive, to defend themselves, even if it probably will result in the death of the other person, a person who was trying to steal their coat. And she says, look, no one is saying that everybody's going to walk away feeling morally fantastic and perfectly clean in this situation. But she is saying, look, in this situation, it's hard to imagine that we would say that the person who helped this woman keep her coat and not freeze to death was doing something that was morally impermissible. And so, again, she's arguing that it looks like abortion providers and acting to provide this service of abortion that results in the termination of a pregnancy aren't doing anything morally impermissible, even if we stipulate that the fetus is a person and as a person has a right to life.